I think today's topic is very interesting, and the speaker also, we all know, he is a very well-known urologist with a special interest in andrology in South Delhi. So today's topic is lower urinary tract symptoms with emphasis on severe UTI. LUTS, as we call it in short. Earlier it was called as prostatitis, but because it can happen without the enlarged prostate, it can occur even in females. It is commonly called as LUTS, lower urinary tract symptoms. And a speaker will let us hear from the expert, Dr. Vineet Malhotra. Just short introduction. Dr. Chauhan, mute कर लीजिए. So Dr. Vineet Malhotra is a well-known urologist. He is now running his own hospital, Dios Hospital in Safdarjung Enclave. Earlier he was in Apollo, Spectra and many other hospitals. A huge experience and a special interest in andrology. So I request Dr. Vineet Malhotra to start his talk on LUTS with his special emphasis on UTI. Dr. Vineet, please.
Thank you so much for your kind words at the outset. I would like to thank Dr. Podar and Dr. Chauhan for this opportunity. And very quickly we will start. Ranveer, I will need you to enable participant screen sharing. I'm not able to share the screen. Ranveer?
Is it okay, sir?
Yeah, now it is okay.
Okay.
Thank you. So very quickly we'll begin this very complex topic on LUTS and complicated UTIs. As Dr. Podar has already described, lower urinary tract symptoms have been around for some time. We have heard about these, but they used to be referred to with reference to BPH only. And we know that they were described as storage, voiding and post-micturition symptoms. Storage symptoms such as frequency, urgency, urgent continence and nocturia. Voiding symptoms such as hesitancy, poor flow, straining, prolonged flow. And post-micturition symptoms such as sense of incomplete voiding and post-micturition dribble. But then a lot of things changed. And I'll just get to what changed. Other markers for serious medical conditions being identified with LUTS. And there were a lot of non-urological causes of LUTS which were identified, especially when we spoke about nocturia or dribbling of urine. These could actually be a hallmark of severe respiratory, renal, hepatic, endocrine, neurological, or even immunological disease state. So, you would be surprised, or rather you would have noticed in the last year and a half, that so many patients who have gotten affected by COVID are presenting with urinary tract symptoms. And practically every day we hear about either a new symptom developing with acute COVID infection or as a post-COVID state where urinary bladder irritability, increased nocturia, all these symptoms are becoming apparent. So medical disease has become a very important part in the evaluation and management of lower urinary tract symptoms. This is perhaps why we are now looking at lower urinary tract symptoms very, very differently. When we look at lower urinary tract symptoms, though the prominent conditions still are BPH, overactive bladder or detrusor overactivity as we call it, and nocturnal polyuria, there can be a lot of other reasons. You can have a lower ureteric stone which can mimic that. You can have a bladder tumor which can cause lower urinary tract symptoms, strictures, foreign bodies. We all know urinary tract infections and inflammation of the bladder, cystitis, can lead to lower urinary tract symptoms in both men and in women. Neurogenic bladder dysfunction, again, commonly can also happen in children. Chronic pelvic pain syndrome, which is so poorly understood and even more poorly treated. And another very poorly understood and poorly treated condition, treatable condition, which is detrusor underactivity or a inactive bladder. So many conditions all leading to lower urinary tract symptoms. In fact, if you look at the guidelines now, the guidelines for even men are changing. So previously both AUA and EAU guidelines used to be labeled as management of lower urinary tract symptoms relative to BPH or benign prostatic obstruction. This entire statement has now changed to management of non-neurogenic male loops including BPH, which means that they are talking about a lot of other conditions now. So if you look at an assessment algorithm, if a male presents with lower urinary tract symptoms and you're looking at history, symptom score. Now symptom score is...
कितना 10 मिनट रखना 15 मिनट रखना है अब बंद कर देंगे हैं
अरे किसकी आवाज आ रही है?
needs to mute.
15 मिनट हो गया अभी
One needs to mute.
अब बंद कर देंगे
So
Please mute everybody except Dr. Vineet. Please mute everybody.
So symptom score, IPSS, is very important part of assessing these lower urinary tract symptoms. In the examination, physical examination, a digital rectal examination, extremely important. Simple urine analysis either by a dipstick or a routine analysis. When you're looking at digital rectal examination and age suggestive, then a PSA will be sent and measurement of a residual urine. If there are no bothersome symptoms, there is the treatment algorithm according to which we follow, which I will come to later. But if you have bothersome symptoms or significant residual urine or abnormal digital rectal examination, then you go according to the findings. So if there's abnormal digital rectal examination and high PSA, you follow up with biopsy and treat accordingly. If you have significant residual urine, you would look at ultrasound of kidneys, kidney function assessment, and then in case of predominant symptoms such as nocturia or storage symptoms, you follow up with further investigations such as uroflowmetry. If you're looking at a patient presenting first, now this is someone that follows the algorithm of the BPH, then you follow the medical treatment algorithm and treat according to the alpha blockers and 5-alpha reductase inhibitors, plan the treatment. And if that is not responsive, then you go to the surgical treatment algorithm. So essentially, this is for those that present with symptoms which may still be related to a bladder neck obstruction or related to a enlarged prostate. Now suppose you have this but you do not, you have predominantly nocturnal polyuria. If this is relevant, then you have to look at modifying lifestyle. Now when we are looking at predominantly nocturnal polyuria, there could be lifestyle factors which have resulted in this nocturnal polyuria, and we try to modify the fluid intake, we try to change the habits of the person and add either diuretic medication, antidiuretic medication with this, or anticholinergic medication, antimuscarinic medication with this. It has been shown that in men who are less than 65 years of age, just modification of lifestyle advice or a vasopressin analog such as desmopressin may work to be effective enough. In fact, here it has been shown that antidiuretic medication is even better than the use of antimuscarinic medication. If we are looking at absence of predominant storage symptoms or a significant residual urine, then we can consider that this is related to more of a prostatic enlargement, and here the education of lifestyle advice will be added with the addition of alpha blockers, and if the volume of the product is greater than 40 ml, then you may add a 5-alpha reductase inhibitor. Now depending on whether there are any residual storage symptoms present or not, and if the residual urine is reduced, then we can add a antimuscarinic agent. Now here the recent addition of mirabegron to our armamentarium has allowed us to use antimuscarinic agent with more comfort, because it does not result in a significant increase in the residual volume. So depending on whether we are finding a increased residual urine volume or a low residual urine volume, the addition of antimuscarinic agent may be modified. Now when you are looking at patients who have still not responded to this, then depending on whether he is a high risk patient or low risk patient, you can decide on the type of intervention, and you know about the various surgical options which are available for BPH. We will not go into this presently, because treatment of BPH by surgical means is another topic altogether. We've had certain presentations on that. Now, if you look at nocturia per se in non-neurogenic lower tract symptoms in men, and there is bothersome nocturia, you again will assess the prostate, you will do a uroflowmetry, and you look at whether this is predominantly storage loops. If there are mixed features, which means nocturia with loops in benign conditions, then again behavioral and drug treatment. This will include a variety of agents such as monoamine inhibitors and behavioral treatment for nocturia. Again, antidiuretic treatment is considered significantly important in these men, and modification of lifestyle factors are important. So there is going to be a multidisciplinary approach. We will just come to that approach in the following slide. And if you are looking at prostatic symptoms, then also if you are looking at a mixed presentation where you have medical conditions, where you have sleep disorders, it will be something which will be a shared care between the urologist and the physician. So if you look at shared care for nocturnal polyuria, you have evaluated the patient's known conditions, you look for sleep disorders, you look for potential causes of polyuria, and the conservative management which will include behavioral therapy, fluid advice, drugs for storage symptoms, drugs for voiding symptoms, maybe intermittent catheterization, leg elevation, weight loss. Then treatment for refractory storage biliary tract symptoms may be required in the form of surgery. Conservative management, which is by the medical specialist, may include antidiuretic therapy, even diuretics or drugs to aid sleep in such patients. You have to look at other potential causes as mentioned in the first slide, whether there are nephrological causes, cardiovascular causes, endocrine causes, neurological, respiratory. So all of these causes in shared causes of nocturnal polyuria have to be ruled out and managed both by the physician and the urologist. Now we come to the other part of the topic, which is urinary tract infections, and we are going to limit ourselves to complicated UTIs, but I'll just give a brief. So we are talking about bacteriuria with symptoms. Asymptomatic bacteriuria can happen by colonization or contamination of bladder, especially if you are growing multiple bacteria in a given urine culture sample. This is far more likely to be contaminated. And pyuria is when you are seeing WBCs in the urine with or without presence of bacteriuria, especially when more than 10 raised to 5 in without any pre-existing conditions. In a catheterized patient, anything more than 10 raised to 2 or 10 raised to 3 per high power field is considered to be significant. Unresolved UTI is UTI that has not responded to treatment. This is also called refractory UTI. And recurrent UTI is defined as reinfection or bacterial persistence following treatment. Now, when we are differentiating uncomplicated and complicated, it's important to remember that if there is cystitis or pyelonephritis occurring in a premenopausal woman with no structural or functional abnormality and who does not have significant comorbidity, is not pregnant, this is considered to be uncomplicated UTI. If this is a child that has a UTI, if the woman is pregnant, or if the patient has structural or functional urinary tract abnormality, obstruction, anything which has resulted because of recent instrumentation of surgery, there is comorbidity such as poor immunocompromised status, poorly controlled diabetes, CKD, all of these fall into complicated UTIs, which is why most men, adult men, most children will fall into the group of complicated UTIs because they usually result from some structural or functional abnormality or anatomical abnormality, such as obstruction because of prostate or because of phimosis in a male child, or reflux, any other condition. So essentially, healthy patients, normal anatomy and function of GU tract, uncomplicated UTIs. Catheter stent use, pregnant woman, history of childhood UTIs, urinary instrumentation, immunocompromised patients, complicated UTI. Now, we know the signs and symptoms, so we can notice this. Basically, most complicated UTIs will result in fever, features suggestive of sepsis, chills, nausea, vomiting, whereas if you're not seeing these, it's less likely to be complicated UTI. Evaluation will include medical history, bowel history, gynec history, geo history, and you will then follow it up with investigations such as a routine urine analysis which is showing pyuria, hematuria, presence or absence of calf, leukocyte esterase or nitrites in urine, and a urine culture. Now this is again a very important thing because a lot of patients come to us and say, should this be the first sample in the morning? What time should be the sample? Can I collect it from home and take it to the lab? Actually, it's very important to remember that it needs to only be a fresh sample, clean catch, midstream. You can take, in fact, the gold standard is considered to be a suprapubic aspiration or even a specimen obtained by catheterization. So if that is met, if these conditions are met, then you can send the urine culture sample. If STD is suspected, then you will need to take a urethral swab for STD testing and do a gram staining for that. Other investigations can include an ultrasound, KUB, a blood culture, CBC, renal functions. In complicated UTIs, you may be required to do a voiding sister ureterogram, CT urography, or a DMSA scan, especially if you are looking at acute complicated pyelonephritis and renal scarring. Now, the most common bacteria, pathogens which are involved are coliforms, and E. coli is the commonest pathogen for both uncomplicated and complicated UTI. But in complicated UTIs, you may get other causes of hospital-acquired infections such as Pseudomonas, Entropy, and occasionally even Staphylococcus. For severe acute complicated pyelonephritis, Enterobacter and other Enterobacteriaceae especially, then you are also looking at fungal or viral causes of UTIs in these particular cases. So this is the guidelines for uncomplicated. I'm going to skip this because this is otherwise going to become a longer talk. So we will talk about antibiotic therapy in UTI, and again I'm going to quickly talk about what is the commonly used agent and what is the commonly preferred duration for therapy. So if you're looking at acute uncomplicated cystitis, nitrofurantoin, trimethoprim, sulfamethoxazole, or fluoroquinolone for 3 to 5 days, these are adequate. We know that fluoroquinolones are extremely effective for uncomplicated UTIs and are very commonly used as first choice agents. Here, even using something like a fosfomycin as a single stat dose is a very effective medication. Now, when you have acute uncomplicated cystitis but with comorbid conditions, the duration of therapy will increase to 7 days. And if you have this ascending further up, and if you have acute uncomplicated pyelonephritis with a mild to moderately ill patient, you may still use oral therapy, but increase the duration from 7 to 14 days, especially if you are using trimethoprim sulfamethoxazole. But if you have someone who is a hospitalized patient, you are going to use IV fluoroquinolone or ampicillin, gentamicin, amikacin, or a third generation cephalosporin for 14 days. As soon as this becomes complicated, as I used to suggest, complicated UTI, and this is a mild to moderately ill patient, the therapy preferred is oral fluoroquinolone, even more rather than trimethoprim sulfamethoxazole, and this is a longer therapy, which means 14-day therapy. And in a hospitalized patient, you are going to look at preferably either a carbapenem or third generation cephalosporin, occasionally based on culture sensitivity and ampicillin, amikacin or gentamicin therapy for 14 days. Now this is 14-day therapy, which is important to remember because a lot of times the duration of therapy only is given for the duration of symptoms, which is not appropriate. For resulting in complete relief of infection and to prevent a reinfection or a persistence of infection, the duration of therapy has to be 14 days. Now in pregnant women, amoxicillin or trimethoprim sulfamethoxazole, again not in the last trimester, and even nitrofurantoin not in the last trimester, for 7 days is enough. Whereas with pyelonephritis, we prefer to use a third generation cephalosporin or ampicillin gentamicin. So what are the recommendations for treatment of complicated UTIs? Use the combination of amoxicillin aminoglycoside, second or third generation cephalosporin plus an aminoglycoside, or a third generation cephalosporin IV as empirical treatment. This is before we have got the culture positivity report. only use ciprofloxacin provided local resistance percentages are low. This is extremely rare. Now, remember this also, that in our setting, in our common setting, we are finding fluoroquinolones to show an extremely high resistance rate. And therefore, the use of third generation cephalosporin or a second generation cephalosporin with aminoglycoside is a preferred agent even without using a fluoroquinolone in such agents. Do not use ciprofloxacin and other fluoroquinolones for the empirical treatment of complicated UTI in patients, especially who have had previous surgical instrumentations, have visited urology departments. If they've used fluoroquinolones in the last 6 months, then we should not be attempting to use that. Another group of patients that we see are those that come in with catheter-associated UTI. Now, very important to remember that we should not be checking arbitrarily or empirically urine cultures for those that have long-standing urinary catheters, and we should not be treating asymptomatic bacteriuria. So we treat only symptomatic catheter-associated UTIs according to the recommendations for complicated UTIs. Take a urine culture prior to initiating antimicrobial therapy, and do not treat catheter-associated asymptomatic bacteriuria in general. This is extremely important because time and again we find that asymptomatic bacteriuria in patients who have long-standing urinary catheters are used. Sometimes you will have someone coming in with urosepsis, so important to understand how severe and grade is urosepsis. Take a urine culture, blood culture, and he needs to have broad spectrum antibiotics immediately. This is the first goal because this is someone who's critically hanging in balance, and then adapt the initial empirical therapy based on the culture report. These are all strong guidelines according to the 2020 EAU guidelines. And what are the regimens which are recommended for urosepsis therapy? Cefotaxime 2 grams, ceftazidime 1 to 2 gram TID, ceftriaxone, cefepime, piperacin, tazobactam, ceftazine, avibactam, gentamicin, amikacin. Again, these can be longer courses from 7 to 10 days up to 14 days depending on patients who have a slow clinical response. But these all have strong recommendations. And these are based on the cultures. So apart from the initial initiation on as broad spectrum antibiotics, you would modify based on the urine and the blood culture reports. To summarize, for uncomplicated UTIs, you may start with either fosfomycin 3 gram single dose, and in case of preventing reinfections, this may be given once in 10 days. You may use Septran or trimethoprim, sulfamethoxazole if this is your preferred agent, and nitrofurantoin or fluoroquinolones. In complicated UTIs, you base it on broad spectrum antibiotic which is started, then depending on the urine culture report, and this should be for 10 to 14 days of culture specific therapy. Aim for a minimum number of antibiotics over time. Self-start, post-coital, and daily prophylaxis. These are important things in terms of managing complicated UTIs. Thank you so much for your kind attention. I think this is a extremely difficult, challenging situation for a lot of us, and I will take some questions if there is time for us. Thank you so much. Dr. Poddar, sir, you have a comment to make?
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Vineet, for very short and quick presentation on bloods, with special emphasis on UTI, and you rightly discussed algorithm how to proceed in a case of lower urinary tract symptoms, and giving due importance to clinical examination, including rectal examination, ultrasound, uroflowmetry. And you rightly said fluoroquinolones should not be used empirically, and if at all empirical antibiotics has to be used, can be nitrofurantoin, amoxicillin, cephalosporin, of course after sending urine for culture sensitivity. So I open the house for question answers. Anybody who can ask the question. Any question?
Dr. Poddar, I see a lot of diabetic patients, and now we have started using SGLT2 inhibitors, and we know that they act by mechanism of glycosuria, by producing glycosuria.
So I want to ask Dr. Vineet, in patients who complain of recurrent urinary, especially in females, urogenital infections, is there absolutely no place for SGLT2 inhibitors for him as a urologist, or we can use it with precautions, and what are those precautions?
It's an extremely important question, and because this has become very relevant after we have found that agents which are releasing glucose in the urine may result in a increased local symptomatology, not only in men but also in women. And general hygiene measures are important, but local factors such as increasing the fluid intake along with maintaining, so in women we would want to use local estrogen creams where required, maintain hygiene as much as is possible. If they have an increased incidence, so now some of these women may particularly have a history where they have post-coital infections, and these may again get increased if they're using such agents, and we may then make sure that their post-coital prophylaxis is definitely maintained. In men, we have found certain men to have an increased incidence of showing increased incidence of balanoposthitis or local symptoms related to the passage of glucose through urine. And again, if they have had a definite episode of balanoposthitis, they may require definitive management. But otherwise, similar factors such as local hygiene, keeping it dry and clean, making sure that the local hygiene is well maintained, adequate fluid intake is taken, and preventive methods such as use of cranberry extract may help in these patients.
Dr. Vineet, I also want to ask you a question. Many times we get patients who are totally asymptomatic, but they continue to show a lot of pyuria, and they also continue to show positive cultures, even with extended spectrum beta-lactamase organisms, and they are totally asymptomatic. They have nothing. So should we treat these people, or should we only treat them and investigate them once they are symptomatic?
Sir, there are groups of people or groups of individuals which will not show symptoms. So immunocompromised people, men and women, children that present with bacteriuria which may be asymptomatic, or men in the in the elderly age group, pregnant women. Now all of these may require to have management in terms of antibiotics. If you are looking at chronic catheter-related bacteriuria or asymptomatic pyuria, which is questionable because of the mixed cultures grown on or urinary cultures, then they are considered to be insignificant and they need not be treated. But whenever we are looking at other causes, we are going to be treating even asymptomatic or abacteriuric pyuria. And there you have to then even rule out causes of sterile pyuria, because you may be dealing with certain causes such as tuberculosis or other causes.
Dr. Vineet, many times very small lifestyle interventions such as increasing fluid intake, because many of our patients and many younger people, they are so busy with their schedule during the day. If you ask them to calculate their water intake, it is not more than 3 glasses in a day. And it is so very important, I think you would like to shed light on this, that small lifestyle interventions, at times double voiding, at times timed double voiding, it works. Because there are students these days, as they are going for board exams, they keep on holding their urine for hours together. कि मैं अब भी एक chapter और कर लूँ, उसके बाद toilet जाता हूँ. These are small things, but they actually happen in real life. Your comment on that?
Sir, absolutely important. I mean, lifestyle changes are the most critical factors for most diseases that we see these days. And urinary tract infections are not different. Personal hygiene, intake of good amount of fluids, a healthy diet, all of these factors are extremely important to prevent urinary tract infections. Simple maneuvers such as keeping the foreskin clean, keeping the area under the foreskin clean, making sure that you wash up after intercourse in both men and women. So simple lifestyle factors can result in eradication of UTI in significant number of people.
Dr. Poddar sir, I think there's a question from Dr. Wajirane on the chat box. Can you read it, sir?
Yes, in the chat box he has written whether it depends on symptoms or whether if a patient is having colony count of 10 to the power 3, 10,000 only, so whether treatment depends on whether he is symptomatic or asymptomatic. Question is, count is very...
I just discussed this, that when we are looking at complicated UTI, which means especially when you are looking at either pregnant women, either you are looking at of stone or obstruction, if you are looking at such factors, then 10 raised to 3 becomes a significant colony count, and this has to be treated. But if you are going to look at this same situation in a man who's or in a person who's catheterized on long-term catheter, and this is a catheter-associated bacteriuria, this will be, and it is asymptomatic, it does not require to be even tested, far less treated.
So besides symptoms, it also depends on whether it is a simple case or complicated case, like
yes. Yes.
Yes, Dr. Bajrani, I think you have got your answer. If you want to any other question, you can directly ask. You can unmute and ask.
Sir, in that case, can I ask a question if there are no questions? Sir, you mentioned about trimethoprim sulfamethoxazole, a drug which we used to use extremely commonly when we were doing our MBBS and then internship house job and even during our MD. I'm talking of 80s and then late 80s. Sir, they have been out of repute, and the place has been occupied by drugs like nitrofurantoin, which are far more safer than sulfamethoxazole, trimethoprim. Sir, what is your usage of this drug, trimethoprim sulfamethoxazole, in UTI? How often do you use? And are there real concerns with this? Because bone marrow suppression is a real lethal complication of this drug. Your comment, Dr. Viris, you must be using this drug, I'm sure, more commonly than any one of us.
So this is an extremely important question. There is no doubt about it that nitrofurantoin has, relegated the use of trimethoprim sulfamethoxazole to secondary place, not only for the fact that it is better excreted in the urine, but also for the fact that it has the lowest resistance rate. And if you look at all the antibiotics, including fluoroquinolones, cephalosporins, Septrans, trimethoprim sulfamethoxazole, nitrofurantoin has the lowest resistance, and so it is the most favored agent for simple urinary tract infections. It is the most favored agent for preventing reinfection, so as prophylaxis. And it also happens to be my favored agent for both these uses. But having said that, there are people who do not tolerate nitrofurantoin or have previously received nitrofurantoin prophylaxis and have had recurrences or reinfections, and these are the people that will end up getting. I prefer to use trimethoprim because that is available and much safer to use than the combination of trimethoprim and sulfamethoxazole. In fact, if I think now, the usage of the combination has become extremely uncommon, and we tend to now use trimethoprim alone as the agent for prophylaxis. As a therapeutic use, it has become a very unfavored agent now.
Sir, I want to ask
Dr. Vineet, just one point. I think in prostatitis, still there is use of this trimethoprim sulfamethoxazole combination. In prostatitis, sometimes either trimethoprim or quinolones may be used, which may not be preferred for UTI in prostatitis. What is your comment?
Sir, it is there as the third line agent of choice for prostatitis and for recurrent urinary tract infections also. But as the question was related to its losing favor vis-a-vis nitrofurantoin, it's there. Overall, I think the fact that previously it was difficult to get trimethoprim alone, and you can get away with the side effects of taking away sulfamethoxazole out of the equation and get almost a similar impact by using trimethoprim alone, has allowed us to use this as the second agent for treating or preventing the reinfections, whether they are UTIs or prostatitis.
Dr. Vineet, I would also like to ask you, you mentioned about complicated UTI and especially UTI in pregnancy. And we know that since some of these drugs are teratogenic and they can have severe side effects, sir, even if a drug is, let us say, intermediate sensitivity, and it is a drug like amoxicillin and clavulanic acid, rather than a drug like sulfamethoxazole and trimethoprim, which is highly sensitive, you would go for a drug which is less teratogenic, has less side effects in pregnancy. Our choice in pregnancy changes according to the situation?
Sir, our choice will change according to the trimester of pregnancy, and it will change according to the situation, no doubt about it. Now, in pregnancy, we know that the risk of ascending infection increases. This is complicated UTI, plus there may be overadded obstruction also, physiological obstruction, as seen in a lot of cases with the gravid uterus. So, augmentin or amoxicillin clavulanate remains the agent of first choice, and cephalosporins are the alternative antibiotics of choice. I rarely, in practice, though it's mentioned, and as I showed you, even in the guidelines, by the EAU guidelines, it's mentioned that you can use nitrofurantoin and trimethoprim, sulfamethoxazole, both in the first and the second trimester. I never use them. I will always use amoxicillin clavulanate or a cephalosporin, even if it is intermediate sensitivity.
Right. Sir, you mentioned about a lot of cephalosporins, and I know from personal experience that at one point in time you were a great fan of cefuroxime, Supacef, injectable Supacef.
Yes.
I did not see cefuroxime in the list of cephalosporins which you showed. Any reason for that?
It's not mentioned in the list. It's still my favored agent as the single agent prophylaxis for surgical procedures. We have actually not discussed those that are used as prophylactic antibiotics for surgical procedures or therapeutic antibiotics for urological surgical procedures. We are talking about those that are based on culture sensitivity. So this is out of the list which I have taken from the guidelines. But sir, you have caught me there. Cefuroxime is my agent of choice for most urological procedures.
I think I would like to invite a comment from Dr. P.K. Gupta or Dr. S.K. Mathur, sir, whoever is available.
Can I talk? Can I ask
a
question?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. You are welcome.
Dr. Vivek Malhotra, doctor, actually we are having one drug which we commonly use these days in urinary tract infection, nitrofurantoin. This has been not discussed so much. What is your opinion about this drug?
सर नाइट्रोफुरेंटाइन तो बहुत डिस्कस कर सर नाइट्रोफुरेंटाइन तो काफी डिस्कस किया. I mean, if you look at it, though they say in the guidelines that nitrofurantoin is the drug of choice for treating simple urinary tract infections in personal use. Now we are talking about different than guidelines. In practice, as a therapeutic agent, I have found it to be less effective until unless we are dealing with a first incidence of infection in someone and someone who has not used nitrofurantoin before. So if you will ask me as the agent of choice empirically before having a culture report, and if someone has symptoms and a routine urine shows significant pyuria, and if I have to use an empirical agent, I would prefer to use a fluoroquinolone. But as a preventive agent, there is no doubt that nitrofurantoin is the most preferred agent. By the guidelines, actually, even as a therapeutic agent, nitrofurantoin or fosfomycin single dose are the first agents of choice for uncomplicated cystitis or urinary tract infections.
We have
Can I
seen using this drug in those people having permanent catheterization regularly. What is your opinion about this?
No, sir. That is something that is the reason I put that guideline and the algorithm there. Catheter-associated UTIs which are asymptomatic do not need to be, actually they don't need to be checked for and they do not need to be treated. You only need to treat it if it is symptomatic. So if a person who is on long-term urinary catheterization develops symptoms, then his urinary culture sample should be sent and he should be put on culture-specific antibiotics.
Thank you, Dr.
Dr. Mathur, sir, your comment?
Further on, sir, nitrofurantoin, Dr. Bleed, very nice talk, very educated to all of us, and we have learned a lot from your talk. One question, sir, like large number of patients, maybe diabetic, non-diabetic, they have long-term positive culture vis-a-vis urine report, and they remain asymptomatic. Can we continue long-term nitrofurantoin to them?
So, sir, extremely important question. Very important question, because here we are differentiating between two groups. So, which is why the definition of complicated versus uncomplicated UTIs was made. When you are talking about diabetics with even with asymptomatic bacteria, it becomes significant. When you are talking about no comorbidities, it becomes insignificant. So we have to understand whether they have any complicating factors. Is there obstruction? Is there a foreign body? Is there a stone? Is there prostatic obstruction? Is there comorbidity, diabetes, anything like that? If it is there, they need to be treated and they need to be put on prophylactic therapy with nitrofurantoin even up to 12 months. And it has been shown that if they have taken nitrofurantoin up to 12 months, their incidence of repeat infection is lowered greatly. Whereas if they are asymptomatic, uncomplicated, we do not need to give this for that disease.
Thank you, sir. I have patients with asymptomatic, but they have urine culture with positive. She's been on nitrofurantoin for almost 8 to 9 months. So they can carry on for a longer time without much of worry.
Absolutely. 12 months is...
Dr. Poddar, can I ask a question?
Thank you.
Okay.
Dr.
Yes,
Poddar,
go
can
ahead.
I ask a question?
Yes, yes.
Sir, I have come across a patient who is COVID positive and recently he has developed, he is mildly COVID as per HRCT chest report and he has got UTI also. So any particular drug which should be avoided in it?
I am not aware of any antibiotic which needs to be avoided according to the culture sensitivity if he has a culture positive urinary tract infection. So I would be glad to have the opinion of the house if they have certain information on this.
Okay, otherwise you can give as per the culture report.
Absolutely, sir. That is my information also.
I don't think there is any contraindication to using any appropriate drug. COVID does not change the status of using drugs in UTI. There is no harm in using an appropriate drug. There is no drug, there is no antibiotic which is contraindicated in COVID, to the best of my information.
Right, sir. Just a point of caution here. We are seeing a lot of lot of people who are developing lower urinary tract symptoms post-COVID. And it is important to ensure that they have an infection. You may be treating symptoms alone for which you do not require an antibiotic. So just ensure, because we are getting a lot of men and women with symptoms of lower urinary tract symptoms and they do not necessarily have a UTI. So for treating symptoms, we have a variety of agents which may be used, and most of these tend to be in the irritative or storage symptoms, and so we can look at using alpha blockers and anti-muscarinic agents in these patients to good use.
I think that was Dr. Gandhi's question, because COVID cystitis is a known entity, but there you may not find any growth on culture sensitivity. But if there is a sensitivity, then you have to give antibiotic according to that. But COVID cystitis without significant pyuria, you should not give antibiotic. I think
the
that's
first
right.
cells are born, if the first cells are there and culture report is awaited, so can we start our antibiotic or should we wait for culture only and then start?
So this is an ideal situation to use something like a nitrofurantoin or a single dose phosphomycin or a fluoroquinolone in a short course of 3 days, because here you are using it empirically for the symptoms only, and then you watch whether you got culture positivity or not. And
I would like, Dr. Vineet, I would like to add a word of caution here. There are some COVID patients who present with diarrhea. So I think in these people, the first drug of choice should not be phosphomycin. We should rather go for
phosphomycin can be avoided. Absolutely. Yes. Then wherever you're looking at any bowel disturbance, especially diarrhea, we know phosphomycin is going to aggravate it.
Dr. Vineet, what is your first choice for prostatitis antibiotic? Which antibiotic?
The fluoroquinolone.
Any specific fluoroquinolone? Like levofloxacin?
So again, my agent of choice has been ciprofloxacin, but again, this is individual. I have seen some men respond better to ofloxacin and some require levofloxacin. I usually reserve levofloxacin for those with more severe symptoms and tend to use ciprofloxacin or ofloxacin with those who have milder symptoms of prostatitis.
In the normal dosage or any increased dosage in prostatitis?
Levofloxacin, because I reserve it for a slightly more severe category, I use at 750 milligrams per oral versus a normal of 500 milligrams oral.
And ofloxacin 200 BD or 300?
No, ofloxacin, because I am using for the milder cases, I use 200 BD.
Right. And Dr. Chauhan was discussing SGL2 inhibitor. I have heard in a conference, I have not seen a patient developing corneal gangrene with SGL2 inhibitors. Maybe he was having recurrent pyelonephritis. So, as told by Dr. Vineet, the role of personal hygiene is very important. If you are giving a male patient SGL2 inhibitor, you must ask him to take care of his personal hygiene as far as his scrotal area is concerned. Because I have
absolutely critical.
Dr. Padar sir, I want to ask my last question. Sir, is there a role of probiotics in UTI on a long-term basis?
Sir, we are looking at a lot of other agents. So now when we are looking at use of those that prevent the, let's say, stickiness of the E. coli fimbriae, we are using cranberry and a D-mannose combination to very good effect. So these agents which may result in reduction of recurrent urinary tract infections are extremely important. Per se, the use of probiotics, I am actually using them in combination with phosphomycin to prevent the side effects of phosphomycin.
Sir, since you mentioned...
Hello? Sir, I lost your voice there.
Dr. Chauhan, your voice.
I said, sir, you mentioned about the D-mannose and cranberry combination. Can you hear me, sir?
Yes, sir. We can hear you now.
So, D-mannose itself causes diarrhea in some patients. Your comments on that?
Sir, these are individually used as per the requirement. So, as I mentioned to you, I mean, I would not use it in a diabetic also. And I would obviously not use it in someone who is predisposed to a diarrhea, but could use a probiotic along with this combination if I'm using a probiotic and cranberry D-mannose.
Dr. Malhotra, I got one very simple question. Now, fluoxetine we know that cannot be used in pregnancy, right, in UTI.
Sir.
And what about ofloxacin in the first trimester of pregnancy?
Sir, I don't use fluoroquinolones either in pregnancy or in the pediatric age group up to the age of 12. Now, I know a lot of pediatricians use fluoroquinolones, But somehow in our training and in our teaching, we have been taught that fluoroquinolones are not preferred agents to be used in the pediatric age populations, and I am not using them.
Okay, pregnancy may not at all.
I don't use them in pregnancy at all, and I don't use them in pediatric age at all.
Okay, thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Dr. Padar, if there are no more questions, sir, can you summarize this wonderful webinar for us?
Yes, I think everybody asked their questions, so we will close this session. We thank Dr. Vineet Malhotra for an excellent lecture on bloods. Especially, we discussed in detail UTI. I think thread and wire. We discussed everything about UTI. We thank Dr. Vineet again for an excellent lecture. And